God, right. So, when to start by letting you introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So I'm Darryl Morris. I'm a radio broadcaster and podcaster, and I do a weekend show, Times Radio, Saturday and Sunday nights. And before that, I worked in music radio. I worked for XFM and Hits Radio, amongst others. And I also make documentaries as well. So last year, I made a documentary for the BBC about web design, and we could talk about that in a little bit because it's kind of relevant
Yeah.
actually to ADHD in a sense. And working on another documentary as well now. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was about 8 or 9, when I was a youngster. So yeah, that's
All
me.
right. I only recently, yeah, nice, thanks for introducing yourself. As I said, I noticed you had ADHD, and I only recently seen that on your social media channel. So, what was it like that then having an early diagnosis of ADHD?
Very helpful. I see there's a lot of late diagnosis happening at the moment,
Yeah,
isn't there? And there's a real kind of trend, I guess, of people being diagnosed in later life at the moment. And whenever somebody gets diagnosed with it in there, I was talking to Richard Bacon about this.
yeah,
He's another radio broadcaster and television presenter. He used to present Blue Peter and The Big Breakfast and various other things. And he kind of quite famously had a diagnosis a couple of years ago.
yeah,
And I was talking to him about that and how he sort of explained how hard it's been to explain the way that he's been feeling and explain some of his behaviors and explain the way that he sort of approaches things differently to other people. And I guess one of the benefits for me of having an early diagnosis when I was a kid was that during the years that affected me the most, really, which were my school years, particularly my secondary school years,
yeah,
I was able to manage it. I was able to sort of understand that, when you get a diagnosis of something like ADHD or any kind of neurodiversion, really,
yeah,
the reason that the helpful thing about a diagnosis, I guess, is that it helps you contextualize what's going on in your brain. And you go, okay, I'm not an idiot, or I'm not, I'm not, it's not something that's a problem with me. It's something, I can understand what's happening, and I can take steps to help myself cope with it day to day. And
yeah,
I'm no doubt we'll talk about some of the things that some of the positive aspects of it as well. I can use and utilize some of the positive aspects of it. And for me, having an early diagnosis just basically meant that I could do that during my most formative years at school. So it kind of, and also the other thing as well, actually, it really helped, probably more so my parents, my mum in particular. My mum was a single mother in my late, in my sort of when I was getting the diagnosis, and I think it helped them. And then latterly, my stepdad
yeah,
and my grandparents as well, who were heavily involved in bringing me up, kind of understand what challenges I was facing as well, and how to best kind of manage me. So I do think in those very, very early days, it was probably more a diagnosis for them than it was for me. But then when I got into my secondary school career, I could just take the steps that I needed to take to manage it, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
As you say, when you're younger, then, like, yeah, as you said, it's with it be more for them, I guess. It's like you're still at the age where you're still understanding yourself, trying to figure out who you are and this part of you. So I guess for when you were younger, at that age, you didn't understand a lot of probably what ADHD was. So how was it affecting you in your young years? And what were the like traits that led up to a diagnosis?
And I was very restless. I could probably best describe my school years and my early life as being very, very restless. I was constantly distracted. And I think it certainly, as I got into my kind of late, I mean, it's always been present, right? It's always been there.
Yeah,
And interestingly, when I had the diagnosis, my granddad in particular, but also my mum a little bit, but my granddad in particular, he sort of had this eureka moment where he was like, "Oh my God, that's been me. That was me. I had that when I was at school, and I've had that throughout my life. And I've got absolutely. I mean, I'm basically I am a sort of carbon copy of my. It was literally a carbon copy of my granddad. and I think that I think it helped him put a few of things that had been present in his life into perspective as well. But it affected me in all the really obvious ways. I mean, I guess, being distracted, the hyperactivity element, a hyperactive brain. I found it very difficult to focus on one task. I found myself wandering, and I found myself being led astray in terms of my sort of thinking, if that makes sense. Like I was sort of like, very very easily led to something more interesting in the room. I think it also made me, I'm not sure actually necessarily if this is true, but it certainly contributed, I think, to me being quite performative as a kid. I was always very into drama and into entertaining people, and I think that's probably a bit of a byproduct of being restless and being distracted by everything else, wanting to perform, I guess. I often, people often ask me this, actually, this question about, what impact did it have on you when you were younger? And I think I often say, like, perhaps my mum is the best person to ask that question to, because it can be quite hard for you to really remember and separate what is just natural childhood curiosity and natural kind of adolescent curiosity and distraction and all the other stuff that's going on in the brain, and which bits were really motivated by ADHD.
Yeah, I was saying, thing is, when you get an early diagnosis, and then what like how it affected you in your childhood, even though you had that early diagnosis, for yourself it can be quite a blur, even though, as you said, for your parents, maybe they might have spotted key things when you was a child, like your grandfather did, and realized there was like a thing that, like you express some traits like yourself. I'd say it's like a condition that's genetic, and that, as I said, probably from his generation, there's not much diagnosis, and you don't really hear of the word ADHD back in them days. But as I said, like, not really as self-aware as a child to remember those traits of, oh, that was ADHD, and then get to that. And that's why I definitely found, like, at least remember stuff like dyspraxia that was a bit more visible for myself. But when it came to like autism, then, like that was like a bit more invisible, and, like less, present things to remember. And then, as you were saying about ADHD, like with it being a bit performative, then I think that's why you kind of see that more people with ADHD tend to be in, get along well in the arts and creative industries. Like you see so many comedians getting diagnosed with ADHD at the minute. So do you think that helping your ADHD helped you into the world of radio and doing stuff like broadcasting?
Yeah, it's the only reason I'm doing it. It's absolutely the only reason I'm doing it. It is the chief reason that I am able to do this job and do it, successfully enough to kind of, for it to be a career. All of the, I think it's very tempting to talk about ADHD as being a disability of sorts, and I think in many ways it is. I think it would be naive of me to come on here and say, look, it's just, it's all brilliant, it's all absolutely fantastic. It isn't.
Yeah.
It isn't. It's very, very difficult, and it's and there are lots of extremely there are lots of challenges, and particularly if you are, especially, so I had a very good, strong, loving, supportive family around me, and I think that they really helped me, and we all helped each other through it. I think if you don't have that, it can be even more challenging. So there's lots and lots of reasons that it's very, very difficult, but I also wouldn't trade it in. I wouldn't trade it in. And the reason I wouldn't trade it in is chiefly because of the way in which the distraction element of ADHD is utilized. Is, for me, I see that really as being curiosity, right? So my ADHD makes me relentlessly curious about other people, curious about how the world works, curious about sometimes the most obscure, finite detail of something, and the hyper focus element, which I'm sure you've talked about, Aaron, on the podcast, and I'm sure you're kind of very well aware of, which is that, once you become once you do become interested enough in something, it becomes all encompassing. Actually,
Yeah.
you end up sort of obsessing about things quite easily. And those two things have made me brilliant at radio because I've obsessed with radio. The hyper focus kicked in, and I became really obsessed with all the finer details of radio. The distraction / curiosity element of ADHD means that I'm very thirsty to keep learning things about people and interviewing people, and what's the next big idea, and coming up with ideas and all that kind of stuff. And so that keeps me moving on in that direction. And what you have when you piece those things together is a really great skill set. It's a really great skill set. And I think I was so fortunate because my school had its own radio station, right?
Yeah.
And I was always kind of really, when I was younger, I was always really into politics, actually. And I think I had a real hyper focus and a kind of an obsession for politics. I knew I would watch BBC Parliament, for hours on end. I knew the finer details. I knew all the main characters. I knew the ins and outs of sort of policy and legislation and stuff like that, which was, tragic, really, but but helpful for me. And I always wanted to get into politics. And then my school set up a radio station, and I was really fortunate at being given the chance to appear on this radio station and to do a radio show. And from that moment, I just knew that this was what I wanted to do. I wanted to do this every day for the rest of my life. I wanted to do radio, and I knew as well that it was going to. My ADHD was no longer going to be a hindrance, but a help. It was going to be, all of a sudden, I was given the tools that I needed as an ADHD kid to make my ADHD work for me. And I think that this is a really big thing about what I'm trying. I went to a school recently and did a talk about this. A bunch of kids who and I actually said to them, there were a bunch of kids who were struggling a little bit. They were behind in their studies, and they were distracted in class or whatever, and they were doing kind of extracurricular bits for them, like people coming in and giving them talks and stuff like that. So I went in and I said to them, how many of you have got ADHD? And the amount of hands that went up was extraordinary. I mean, like most of the people in the room. And when I was a kid, I was pretty much the only ADHD kid in the school, right? In a school of like nearly 1,000 people, you couldn't, if I'd have asked that, it probably would have been me and maybe one other, who was going through the process. I was the token ADHD kid, and now loads and loads of hands were shooting up, which I think is really encouraging and really brilliant. But the point that I was making to them was, they have to try and make school work for them. And this is what getting an ADHD diagnosis does for you, I think, is that you can rearrange your world so that it works for you. And what worked for me was, and I'll give you an example of this. So in GCSE English, we were studying Romeo and Juliet. And in group discussions, I was able to participate brilliantly. I could understand the subtexts, and I could understand character development, and I was clearly, an advanced intellect on some of the other people in my class, being able to dissect and understand this piece of literature. And then when it came to writing it down, when it came to doing an exam for an hour where I got asked questions about that, I crumbled. I just couldn't do it. I was never able to articulate myself in that way and, effectively enough for me to get a decent grade. My teacher at the time, Miss Smith, always remember this, or Mrs. Smith probably. She recognized that, and she arranged for me to do my English exam orally. So an examiner came in, and I was able to stand in front of the examiner, and I was able to speak my answers, right? Which is what I did. I was a talker, and I was brilliant at articulating myself through speech and talking to people, and and I did, and I'd love to say I got an A, but I think I got a high B, which was more than I was expected to get in that lesson.
It's a great thing to get, and I say with ADHD, as you say, with any like neurodivergency, it's like a umbrella of different things, like affects you in different ways. As you say, that there is some elements that you can struggle with, and then some elements you can sign with. And I guess with that and with the being able to go into schools and talking about it, then you can start to talk about, like, inspiring to think that, as I say, make it work for you, and make it work for, like, find a way of making school work for yourself, as there's so many ways that, like, places like school and then further education to any work that might not work with a person for ADHD or any type of neurodivergency. And as I said, it's finding a way of working for that. And it's helpful if you got, like, the people there that you can support you and understand you and empathize with you, as like, it is important to be able to have these conversations as that, because otherwise people wouldn't know about much about the conditions and, the condition of ADHD. Otherwise, the trope that otherwise that people would just think of the trope of, like, loud disruptive person in the corner. And as I say, that, it's good to make sure it's not having a inventive mental impairment. Sometimes people think of ADHD, and as I say, making sure that people can see the skills like you have for something like radio.
Yeah, I think that's very right, and I think my granddad's experience probably speaks to that. In that when he was younger. I mean, God, he was just if you had any diversion from the norm, you were just simply regarded as being stupid. You were thick. You just couldn't. That was it. You were written off basically. And I think that it's a tragedy, really. But I think that I think throughout the course of his lifetime, he hasn't. And he's very happy and he's okay. And he's still around and he's well, and he's had a good life and traveled and all sorts of stuff. But I think that he has certainly not been afforded the opportunities that I've been afforded because of the way that society viewed people like him at the time, right?
Yeah.
And I think to be part of a generation who've been able to shift the dial on that, I think is great. And see those things not only like I say, not only as something that you have to combat, but that you can use some elements of it to thrive. Like I use my ADHD every day. My ADHD powers me every single day to do what I want to do. That restlessness, that sort of desire to keep going, somewhere else to be, somewhere else to see, something to do. Constant distraction means that I stumble across a new interesting idea that becomes a documentary, right? And then in the process of making that documentary, I use my ADHD again because I'm trying to my hyperfocus kicks in and I spend loads of time researching that thing, and I will then use my ADHD to be constantly curious, and where's that taking me and which rabbit hole am I going to fall down, trying to find out more information about this part of this thing that I'm researching or whatever. And I think it's just about giving people the tools to be able to bring the best out of themselves. And I think we've probably got to that point with ADHD now, which is great.
Yeah, and that's great. Yeah, as I said, there's some way to still progress with it and make sure things work. But as I say, and it's like things come along a long way. And as I said, it can help you in your, like, day-to-day life. As I said, if you having a curious mind, then you work in the fields of journalism. And now, as I said, you used to work in like XFM and music radio, but now, as I say, you worked then for talk radio, talk TV, and now you have Times Radio. And I guess having that curious mind has helped you in the world of journalism, and like having an ADHD type mind can help you in the world of journalism for something. As I was saying, going back to, like, when you started to get hyper focused and get curious about even the BBC Parliament.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed the question. Sorry, what was the question?
Oh, right. I was just saying that, like, you can tell how much, like, it has helped with your career so far, like, and it helped you, like, into radio.
Yes,
like,
massively.
Talk radio and journalism.
Yeah, massively. And that was a real watershed moment, I think. And again, I think this is the importance of a diagnosis because when I was sort of stepping into the world of work and I was coming to figure out what I wanted to do, and radio, I was doing lots of radio, and it became quite clear that radio was something that I wanted to do. I was able to recognize that my ADHD was going to be an asset, right, rather than a hindrance. And I think as soon as that moment kind of clicked, I probably wouldn't have. I'm not sure necessarily if I would have been as confident of my ability to do this had I not known that I had ADHD, right? Because it was always
Yeah,
kind of there as a bit of a secret weapon that I had, that I knew that I had this sort of particular set of skills that gave me an advantage on other people through having ADHD, and so I think it actually ended up where in the classroom it would give me it was sort of baggage, and it would probably hinder my confidence. When it came to doing this job, it certainly it boosted my confidence in a way. And now in the industry, the people that I come across, there are so many people that I come across that I either think you've got ADHD and you don't know it, or I sort of feel like I can diagnose it a mile off, right? There's so many people that I come across, I go, yeah, you definitely got ADHD, even if you don't know it. And people who have been diagnosed with ADHD, this industry is absolutely littered with them, littered with them.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I was just saying that, like if I was at a certain point when you was like within the industry that it was secret weapon for yourself, was there ever a point where you were diagnosed but you didn't talk about it as much? So have you always been as open and talkative about your experiences with the ADHD?
yeah, I have tried to be. Yeah, I have. I think perhaps the only time that I felt a bit reticent was school, really. And when people would ask me about it, I tried to do my best to explain it. I've never sort of felt I've never really ever felt shamed
Yeah,
to be ADHD. That hasn't ever crossed. I've sort of like I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure that I've been conscious of the potential to be ashamed of being ADHD. I guess that's because I guess the early diagnosis comes into it again,
yeah,
because really it's all I've ever known.
yeah,
Being ADHD was a way of explaining who I was and what I was about and why I was doing certain things and why I was a certain way. So it was a thing. It was almost like, if somebody had a problem with something that I'd done, and I knew, not to exploit having ADHD, but
yeah,
if I knew that my ADHD was present in something that I'd done wrong, or needed to explain, needed to be accountable for, then I knew
yeah,
that it was something I had in my pocket that I could say, listen, I'm sorry about that. I've got ADHD. I'm sorry I've been distracted and not achieved what I want to achieve here. Can I have another crack at it? It's, my ADHD is in play. So there's been that element of it. I think I found it a little bit hard to explain sometimes to my school friends, who probably didn't quite get it. And I probably wasn't articulate enough in being able to explain what it was. Especially because I think attention deficit hyperactivity disorder obviously is a bit wordy, and a bit complicated for a school pupil to
yes,
understand. And I think some of them got the wrong end of the stick and assumed that it meant that I craved attention. Sort of like attention deficit disorder, meaning that I hadn't been given enough attention and I needed now to be given attention,
yeah,
which actually sort of is true. But
yeah,
that isn't what attention deficit disorder actually stands for.
yeah,
So I always found that perhaps slightly tricky to explain, and would maybe back away from explaining it sometimes. But certainly I've worn it as a badge of honor. Just absolutely, I just think it's such an ingrained part of me. And I think it explains so much about who I am and what makes me tick. And I think it's such a brilliant asset in what I do. And I'm so proud of the way in which my mum reacted to it, and my teachers and certain teachers helped me. And I'm proud of the fact that I got that early diagnosis. And I'm really keen to, I'm very keen for nobody to live a life of unexplained restlessness. That I want to talk about it at every opportunity. I want to explain it at every opportunity. I want to tell people who've got ADHD, that it's going to be okay, and that actually there's lots of really great benefits, and that there's lots of things. You're not an idiot, and you're not stupid. It doesn't make you different, really. It makes you
yeah,
superhuman. It makes you great and superhuman. And I also want to reach those people who perhaps feel that restlessness, and have never been able to categorize it, and it's plagued them more than it's helped them, right?
Yeah.
So I think on that basis, I've never struggled talking about it or, wanting to be open about it.
I think that's an amazing thing to be able to, have the ability to do because, growing up in as a teenager or as a child, it can be quite a struggling thing to be able to be as open and honest about yourself, and especially personal things about myself, about yourself. As I was only like later on in like when I started to become an adult, 18, that I decided that I felt comfortable like opening up about my, neurodivergencies. I could like had diagnosis before. I could have done it years ago, and I kind of felt then this I kind of did years before. But as I say, it's great that you felt comfortable and you were able to start talking to like your friends, as you said, even though like you may have not always been articulate with the words as you know you are. But as I said, it's quite great that you were able to, I say, have the support from like your school, your parents to understand what ADHD is now to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that that's relevant at home, sort of in my home life as well,
Yeah,
right? Because I've talked a lot about my career and how ADHD has kind of powered my career and the
yeah,
restlessness, curiosity thing, and the hyper focus thing works really well for when you find a passion and you make that passion your career, and the contribution to journalism. But also, I've got a home life as well, which is
yes,
my partner Michaela, sort of explaining to her some of my behavior as well, and her understanding that she describes me as having a busy mind. I said, you've got a busy mind, and I think that's a really nice way of describing
yeah,
it. That's a very good way of describing it. And sometimes that means, she'll kind of she recognizes that sometimes I go from being intensely loving to a bit distant, like quite quickly. And
yeah,
there's quite a quick kind of interchange between those two states. And I think if she didn't understand that my ADHD was at play there, and that I was being intensely loving one moment because I love her intensely, and then a bit distant the next, but just because my mind's on something else. It's not a
yeah,
reflection of how I feel about her. It's just because my mind has taken me to somewhere else, and I've got to think about this for a moment, and I've got to understand this, and I've got to write this down, whatever it is that I'm thinking right now. If she didn't understand that, and if she didn't understand
yeah,
the dynamics of that being ADHD, I think it would make a relationship extremely difficult. I think I'd be too difficult to live with. Whereas she's able to go, okay, this is just Darryl's ADHD. The kitchen's a mess, but he's had a brilliant day of writing, So
yeah,
we've got to get the balance between those two things, and I've got to accept that that's the way that these things these things go.
yeah.
So I think that's been very helpful for us, and it's been very helpful in our home
Yeah,
life as well.
because it does help, I guess, to find a way of like understanding that, as you say, been talking about why it's like working with ADHD, but as I said, like probably for home life and your day-to-day life, where as I said, sometimes, like you're focusing on so many different things at one time, and as you get a busy brain, and then as I assume that sometimes you may have like certain tasks that you want to do, like I'd say you might have things you need to tidy up or a bit messy, and then like can be struggling between bouncing from one thing to another, remembering what to do or like finish off the task you already started. So I guess there are some things that probably like still establishing routines and like ways of doing things in home life, and
Yeah, and it doesn't stop her getting annoyed at me because
yeah,
she's still and she's allowed to be annoyed at me about those
yeah,
things. But it helps. It's a card that I can play, and I can say, "Listen, I'm so sorry, this has happened because I've got ADHD." But it also just eases. It just removes a lot of friction, I think, from our
yeah,
relationship. I think it removes a lot of friction from our relationship, and also it helps me be conscious of it as well. And I can go, if I haven't done something I need to do, or something's been left undone, or one of the real benefits of this and this kind of like this is more of a professional point than a personal point, but one of the benefits of being ADHD in a creative
yeah,
role. And I would also say that if you have an ADHD member of staff, right,
yeah,
let them work whenever they want to work. right?
Yeah.
Take them off a rota. Don't have them working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Let them build their own schedule in their own week. You will always get the best out of them, because that's what I do. Now I do that because I'm afforded the chance to do it.
Yeah.
And actually, the sort of rhythm of my week is that I do a radio show Saturday and Sunday night, 10 till 1. So that's fixed in the week. I have to be there, and it
Yeah.
has to happen. And actually, I do wonder sometimes that if it wasn't fixed in the week, then it probably wouldn't happen. I would never
Yeah.
get around to doing it. I know that I've got this looming at 10 o'clock on Saturday night. I'm going to be sat in front of a microphone in a studio, and I better have something to say for myself, and I better have some guests booked, and there better be something, coming out of, there better be something interesting going on, because a radio show is going to happen. You've got 3 hours of radio to fill. So I think putting things in your week like that are sort of like really hard deadlines, but around that, I can sometimes have my very best ideas, at 2 o'clock in the morning, as everybody does, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Fine. But then I've got to work on them then. Yeah, I've got to work on it right then. And actually, there are lots and lots of examples of me struggling to get sleep at night and coming in here. I'm in my home office now, coming from my bedroom into here and spending 2 or 3 hours writing up my best ideas, writing a column, writing some scripts for something that I'm going to do for the radio. And actually, some of my best work gets done there and then. If I waited to get onto that 9 to 5 thing, if I was going to say, right, I'm going to sit in the office 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., the quality of the work wouldn't be great. I wouldn't get as much done. I'd be distracted. There are some days I wake up and I go, do you know what? Today, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be able to sit at my desk, and I'm not going to be able to bang out loads of great work. I'm going to watch that film that I really needed to watch. I'm going to read that book. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go for a coffee. And during that process, I'll have some really good ideas, and then I'll be able to craft them at the times that I feel like I'm able to craft them. So I think everybody experiences that. I think that's something that lots and lots of people experience.
Yeah.
I think ADHD heightens that experience, really. I think it makes it more intense. So I think having the diagnosis of ADHD makes me recognize that, and I don't fight it too much. You know what I mean? And so around the house is the same. Like today, I might not do any cleaning, right? I might not do any cleaning today, but tomorrow I might go absolutely mad, and I will clean for 7 hours, and the house will be absolutely spotless. And so that's when the cleaning is going to get done. And so Michaela comes home, and she's not going to be annoyed that I haven't done a certain thing. She knows it's going to get done, but it needs to get done on my schedule. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand that, because I guess if you've been focusing on one thing, then it's hard to factor in that there's several different things may have to do around the house, and if you got like a list of things that you might have to do in a day, it's hard to sometimes switch from one task to another. And I think that is going to be applicable over different neurodivergent conditions on a day, can be quite a relatable thing. Then, and I think when you were saying about that kind of restlessness and popping up the ideas and continually working on you work on your own schedule, and it's hard to control that sometimes. I guess from that, it can be hard to sometimes establish proper rest breaks and rest times, and know how to manage a sleeping routine and get a routine of being calm and relaxed and switching your brain off.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think you have to be quite disciplined with yourself.
Yeah.
There's a healthy balance to be struck, I think, between giving yourself enough freedom in your day or your week or whatever to be able to sort of act a little bit on impulse, to be able to sort of get the best out of yourself. It's not even just achieving stuff. I mean, I could probably sit down. I could probably do a 9 to 5, right? And I could sit down and I could do Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And I could probably tick off the things I need to tick off on the list. But would they be brilliant? Would they be done really well?
Yeah.
Would they be the best of me? They probably wouldn't, would they? And I think that it's about that, really. It's about getting the best out of you. But also apply you do have to apply discipline. I mean, my diary is a work of art, right? If my sort of calendar on my iPhone, and I use you can use technology to do this as well. So I have everything's an Apple product, which I suppose is the same for quite a lot of people these days. But that's quite important for me, because it means that I've got my calendar and my to-do list and my emails and all sorts of other bits and bobs, on my phone
Yeah.
that corresponds with my laptop, that corresponds with my iPad, right? So wherever I am and whatever I'm doing, I'm sort of hooked up to my organization machine. And my diary is a work of art. If it's not in my diary, it doesn't happen. And I know that if I didn't do that, if I didn't keep a really regimented diary, if I didn't keep notes, if I didn't stay organized, it would be utter chaos, total chaos. So again, I think one of the benefits of having
Yeah.
ADHD, we've talked a lot about the benefits of ADHD is using the positives and sort of knowing how to use your hyper focus and use your curiosity to pick the right career and utilize it in your professional life and explain some of your behavior in your personal life and perhaps to give yourself a little bit of a break and all that sort of stuff. But another really important thing as well is managing the downfalls, right?
Yeah.
The bits where life is really tough. Like life can be very, very tough when you're not very well organized. And so I go to extreme lengths to make sure that I am fully organized. This office is my office, right? And
Yeah.
I've got this room, and I'll show you. So I've got some whiteboards up here
Yeah.
with sort of the various projects that I'm working on and some various notes and stuff, and a couple of other bits and bobs. And then my kind of my desk is here. And if I didn't, Michaela knows that if I didn't have this room, it would be a nightmare. Because I need somewhere to put my brain on the wall and I need things. So I need to use these tools, these mechanisms to organize myself and to organize my life as a bit of a crutch for those bits that are going to be difficult for me. And again, I think just knowing that and putting those things in place can be a massive benefit.
Yeah, as I said, it's important thing to know is like kind of like life hacks to think of, right, as you say that, you put that thing there on, you like, at least you know where you're placing things, where place. It's like something that I kind of, when I was talking to a comedian last night who was as dyspraxia, Harriet Kemsley, I don't know if you know of her, but she was saying that, I'd say like, important to have herself in a calendar, like even like times of like when she would need to like leave the house or time
Yes.
of doing certain things like that.
Yes.
It's like learning, finding a way of like having like a calendar or having like reminder set up for even like the simplest tasks in your day to day to make sure you can like able to visualize what you need to do day in day out and find a way of doing that. And that, as I say, you got like places for like when you look at your whiteboards to where you would find your computer and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Because those are the sort of crutches and the structures around which you can be creative, right? So
Yeah,
if I can get all those kind of things in place and I know that I'm organized on those fronts, that gives my brain the freedom to then sort of rest and be creative and do the creative bit. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't get very far, I don't think.
yeah,
I'm also learning, I'm learning quite a lot about ADHD as well. Again, one of the slight downsides of having an early diagnosis is that
yeah,
I think I was somewhere, I can't, this is up for debate between me and my mum. She can't quite remember either. I was somewhere between 8 and 10 when I got the diagnosis. And one of the issues about being that age is that you're not particularly interested in the finer details of it, right?
yeah,
So it's actually only as I've got into adulthood that I've started to like kind of research it and talk and figure out more about what ADHD actually is and what it's doing to me. And one of the things that I've always struggled to account for is the hyperactivity bit, because I
yeah,
was hyperactive. I was sort of hyperactive as a kid, and I am still sort of hyperactive now a little bit, but nowhere near, but not really a massive amount more than anybody else. Like,
yeah,
it's really, and I read something the other day that really brilliantly explained this to me, which was that the hyperactivity element of having ADHD is as much about the hyperactivity of the brain, right? And how hyperactive your brain can be, which is absolutely right. I don't know why I didn't think about that. I don't know why that didn't land with me sooner, but I thought that was really, really interesting. And so if your brain is kind of hyperactive, and my brain is
yeah,
hyperactive a lot of the time, having those tools and those mechanisms around that keep in a place, a sort of scaffolding, if you will, for my
yeah.
brain, become really, really important, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it kind of does come quite important now. And as you said, like you know, I guess one reason why you like didn't realize that before, I guess it's like when those invisible parts of ADHD that, you know, like from like a neurotypical or like a non-ADHD person, it's one thing that they wouldn't see because, as you say, you know, like, you know, you were told as a child about being hyperactive physically, then, you know, and it's not like anybody would see the hyperactive, busy mind that's going on behind the scenes. And
Mm.
I guess that what was, as you were saying about when you've been into schools to start talking about this stuff, and what I think is important is having those conversations. I'll say, I think even though you had your diagnosis, I guess you probably would have found like having a person like yourself coming into school and starting to talk about ADHD at least gives that space to start to like know some of those finer details as a child, because I found when I got diagnosed with dyspraxia and autism, at least no, like with the dyspraxia, I knew like kind of like the more physical trait stuff, challenges of like struggling with like shoelaces and certain practical tasks, knew about that, but like some of the more organization, structural stuff, I kind of like learned later on, and then with like autism, it took me a while to start to understand that. So I find that probably with the more invisible traits, then it's like if you have an early diagnosis, it's still throughout your life you're like trying to find the pieces and you know put it together of how it affects yourself. And maybe like sometimes as a parent you might not have the best resources, and you know like to go and be able to learn how to best support your son or your child, as you know, you, even though you said you like your mother and your parents kind of found a way of knowing quite a bit about it.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And I also think it. The other thing as well that I was kind of keen to talk to you about.
Yeah,
I don't know whether what your experience is of this, and I think this is one element that I'm only really coming to terms with lately,
yeah,
is the emotional element of ADHD as well, and the emotional
yeah,
impact that it has. Because we've talked a lot about the kind of practical, which is
yeah,
being organized, understanding when you're being distracted,
yeah,
using that distraction to your advantage, and making documentaries, uh, hyperactivity, managing
yeah,
that at home, etc. But there's one thing that really stood out to me quite recently. I was listening to a podcast by Rory Smith and Alistair Campbell. It's like their it's massive hit
yeah,
podcast. They're about politics. The rest is politics. Good.
yeah. Listen to that myself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and they were talking a little bit about. It was around the time that the whole Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng
yeah,
debacle was unfolding, and Rory Smith described them as being a bit ADHD. He said, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are acting a little bit ADHD, and
yeah,
I sort of like I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that, and I was waiting for the
yeah,
explanation, like in what sense? What do you mean in what sense? And he said, as if they have a bit of as if they're struggling with empathy, and they're struggling with to understand
uh,
the emotion. And that really stood out. I was like, I paused the podcast and I drafted an email that I think I sent to him, and I can't remember, maybe I didn't. And I went down a bit of a rabbit hole at that point, because
yeah,
I thought that isn't ADHD at all. That's a total misreading of what ADHD is,
yeah,
because ADHD heightens that sense of emotion, and it heightens that sense
yeah,
of empathy, right? And this is one of the things that I've been kind of grappling with of late, is why do I feel such such an immense sense of emotional empathy,
yeah,
and damagingly so, actually, kind of
yeah,
where it leads me to sort of absorb other people's feelings in a way that is detrimental,
yeah,
and leads to anxiety, and it leads to
yeah,
it's never quite led to depression, but I know that for me, but
yeah,
I know that's a path that I could easily walk.
yeah. Like you know, like I've moments where you can just feel a bit sad, or like you know, it's like
Yeah,
have you you know, like everyone else that without being like depressed as a condition, everyone kind of like has those days where you kind of feel a bit more down, or your mood has dipped and stuff like
yeah.
that. Yeah,
But also deeply affected by what people think about
yeah,
me. really anxious about the contribution that I'm making to the world, and a real just really heightened emotion, really
Yeah,
heightened emotion, and a real sense of emotional empathy. And it struck me and fair play to
yeah,
Rory, not to sort of want to kind of gang up on Rory Smith, because I'm sure he's a decent enough guy, but I think he got that wrong, and
yeah,
it troubled me that there are people who think that having ADHD comes with a lack of emotional empathy. And
yeah,
I think there's probably a part of that is because sometimes the outward expression of ADHD
yeah,
can be quite selfish, can't it? You can and this is the thing about my girlfriend, is that
uh,
Michaela kind of trying to grapple with, why I'm really affectionate the one minute and why I'm really distracted the next, or I'm not affectionate, or I'm quite cold, the next minute. Yeah, I think that can perhaps present itself as being a bit emotionally detached, whereas in reality, what's happening
yeah,
is you are hyper attached emotionally. You're hypersensitive. I'm incredibly emotionally sensitive. I'm very, very
yeah,
empathetic. I feel deeply torn apart by people's suffering, and if I've harmed somebody, or if somebody's
yeah,
being harmed, I really struggle with those kind of senses of injustice and all that sort of stuff. I absorb other people's feelings really readily, and I think that's something that I'm trying to kind of grapple with my ADHD, is
yeah.
A, how to manage that, and B, what kind of impact is that having?
As you were saying about what we always do, it said, because it's punked off. Yeah, it's kind of like similar to many people, like wrongly assume what OCD is, and like as if like kind of hinting on that, like some people have like a certain image of conditions, and like as I was saying, it's very one-dimensional, and as I said, it's wrong end of the stick of what the condition is. And as I say, ADHD is like an umbrella condition of like so many different experiences. Or as you say, that as much as it can present physically as certain things, it's like if you don't have it, you don't see what's behind the scenes of it. And then with like being a neurodivergent condition, I think empathy divergent is divergent from that, because we empathize as neurodivergent people, but I think can solve quite a different problem to people, as you say, might so not show up as how like it typically shows up for everyone else. I say that like you hyper empathize, and that's something that when he was talking to another person on a podcast with ADs who were went on, that make me the Prime Minister. So as you were saying that, like going on that, you like realise how much of like social personality is about social injustice, and so it's quite hyper empathetic, and how much, like an ADHD person like listens in, and like cares about people. And I guess sometimes with the words associated with like the deficit of attention deficit, sometimes it's like people get the wrong end of the stick of what that means.
I don't think deficit works, does it really,
Yeah, it
as a
doesn't.
term?
Yeah,
I don't think it's a deficit of anything. Actually,
yeah,
I think it's an abundance, an overabundance of stuff,
yeah,
isn't it? Really, it's an overabundance of curiosity. It's an overabundance of empathy.
yeah,
It's a sort of it's quite an overwhelming
yeah,
experience, isn't it, having ADHD? So
yeah,
I think that's right. And I'm sure there's plenty of work going on that, and that's
yeah,
probably for somebody who's cleverer than me to figure out whether that really does need renaming and recategorizing.
yeah.
But yeah, I guess. But these conversations are really helpful, right?
Yeah, it
And it's
is helpful. Yeah, as you
important.
say, saying that, like with the term deficit, I think sometimes like the language that has been traditionally used is reflective of like a non-ADHD person, of how they might have saw ADHD. And as you're saying, with like empathy, like I think people who can have ADHD or autism, dyspraxia, any type of neurodivergent sees we are quite hyper empathetic, but I think we can show empathy in a different way that might be a bit less obvious to somebody else, because I say that since your mind works differently, it's like you don't like it's special to same as other people, and like I guess you sometimes don't have like the social same, like social rules or similarities like that with other people.
Definitely, 100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah. And I also think kind of like to sometimes empathy to a fault, actually, sometimes,
yeah,
that where it really I'm kind of conscious of it not. I'm trying really hard to not let it take me over, and overwhelm me and flood me, really, because I think that's the other thing as well, is it can really flood you,
yeah,
um, and you can be really buried by it, where it becomes anxiety, and it becomes
yeah,
depression, and it takes you to a bad place. And I think that's I think that ADHD also comes with a propensity to addiction as well, and to be addicted to
yeah,
things. And I've never really, like, it's not that's never necessarily been a problem for me, in so much as I've never had an alcohol addiction, I've never had a
yeah,
drug addiction. I've been very fortunate in that respect.
yeah,
But I think that, you think addiction, don't you? And you think about drugs, you think about
yeah,
alcohol, you think about those kind of like typical social issues
yeah,
that people would attribute to the term addiction.
yeah,
But actually, sometimes that addiction can be an addiction to feeling something, an addiction to, I don't know, perhaps that sort of overlaps with the hyper focus thing as well, right?
yeah,
But a sort of an overabundance of something, right? And I think
yeah,
sometimes my ADHD leads me to an overabundance of emotion, which becomes a burden, which becomes unhelpful, and
yeah,
becomes a barrier. Um, and so I'm constantly kind of trying to keep a track of that and when that's happening.
yeah. As I said, like, as I will say that, like certain traits can feel like a two-pronged fork, like two ends of like ours, can be like a bit of a good thing and a bit of a bad thing, as you say that. Like probably in the job of journalism, it has helped to empathize and have compassion with people, and especially when you're talking on certain stories, and like when you've done like stuff like talk radio and talk TV, because that was like a phone-in station, to be able to empathize with the listener, especially if you're talking about stuff like mental illness or like certain way of topics. I guess it was important to empathize with the listener, but probably like going through like stuff like the pandemic and like certain stuff over the news and working in the like the world of news, I guess some certain times, I guess it can be quite overwhelming then, like when you empathize with certain headlines or like certain things in the news, and it gets quite much, is it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wrote a bit about the early pandemic, and what kind of impact that had, and what kind of absorbing emotion and information as rapidly as you do
Yeah,
when you've got ADHD had on. I think I haven't actually really considered ADHD's role in me feeling that way up until this point. So thank you for bringing that up.
yeah,
And I think, just to explain that story, what was going on was I was doing the overnight show at the time on what was the old talk radio.
yeah,
So it was speech radio, but I was doing, so the show was 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Sorry, it was 1 a.m. till 5 a.m.
yeah,
So it was a really brutal time of the day, like it was my first show on a speech radio station. So I was kind of starting at the bottom, and it was really difficult and really brutal. And you would sleep all day and you would work all night. And I'd get to bed about 8 a.m. I'd wake up at about 4 p.m. To try and get my 8 hours. And the world would just hit you like a steam train, right? So like
yeah,
that happened anyway in normal times. Never mind when suddenly the news was on fire about this impending spread, this impending virus. Um, and I would you would you know I would. I recognize myself, and this may have happened anyway, whether or not there was a pandemic. But I found myself becoming just increasingly anxious about that 4 o'clock wake up, when suddenly my phone would be full of notifications, and I'd have to be, and obviously because of the job, I had to be across the news as well, right?
yeah,
So it wasn't like I could kind of turn it off, really. Um, and they would hit me like a steam train, and then I would try and wrap my head around the news, have a conversation with the producer, have something to eat, go into work, record some bits and bobs, be on at 1 a.m. And in a radio studio, I don't know if you've ever been in a radio studio, there tends to be screens everywhere, right? So there's lots of screens kind of in front of you with the information you need. But there's also TV screens because you kind of need to keep across what's going on. If there's some breaking news, you might need to be across it or whatever. So we have maybe 4 or 5 screens in front of us that have got the news channels on them. So that's rolling news throughout the night.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this virus.
Yeah.
Well before anybody else was, because it was an international show. We covered a lot of international news because it was a late night show. Sorry, we covered a lot of international news. So we were covering news out of China quite regularly, and the big story out of China for several weeks before it became a big news here was the emergence of this new virus. So we were talking. Well, I'd been talking about this since mid-January, right?
Yeah.
So I had this sort of combination of things where I was waking up at 4 p.m. to a whole stack of news alerts. I was then trying to get my head around this terrible news. Then I was staying up all night, really, with the news channels on and talking about this stuff. And understandably, it became overwhelming. And there was one day I remember waking up and, there was that period, wasn't there, sort of mid-February?
Yeah.
When all of the news was about the virus. Right, but there was really no other news. Like it was just because everything was being affected. So sport was being cancelled. So the sports news was about the virus. People were being asked to stay at home. People were working from home a bit more. It wasn't locked down at that point. But
it was like like started to see stuff from like people coming from holiday in Italy or wherever. If you like gone into your like local. Like surgery, would have seen like loads of things plastered about it,
Yes.
And, of course, and you kind of crept in and, because it felt surreal.
It was just everywhere, wasn't it? It was just everywhere. And I remember I woke up one afternoon and after the night shift, and the news alert that I woke up to was the Canadian tourist industry. How is... I don't know why I got this notification.
Yeah.
But the notification was, how is the pandemic going to destroy the Canadian tourist industry? And I had a panic attack, right?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, at that point, I can't be having a panic attack about the Canadian tourist industry. That's ridiculous. that's totally ludicrous. Why on earth would I do that? And I realized then that I needed to stop. I needed to take a break. So I had a week off, actually. So it was the week just before lockdown. I had that week off, and I came home and I watched reruns of The Royal Family, the sitcom, on TV, on BBC iPlayer, whatever it was. And I just disconnected for a week. And I think what I've recognized about that time was, and actually from then, having had that time off, and understanding how I was taking stuff in, I actually settled, and I actually had quite a good pandemic in terms of my mental health, in terms of how I was feeling and, navigating through it and all that sort of stuff. But I recognized that there was something present in ADHD that meant that overwhelm. I was sort of, I wasn't able to, I was struggling to know which information to take in and which information not to take in. And that information that was coming at me about the Canadian tourist industry felt like really consequential and really important. It felt like I was being attacked by a bear. And the primal bit of my brain couldn't differentiate between stuff that I should be panicking about and stuff that I shouldn't be panicking about, if that made sense.
But I think probably when you seen the thing about the Canadian tourist industry, it probably wasn't the Canadian tourist industry. It's probably like seeing about the pandemic in front of you. And like, even though like you might review the word pandemic, but like, like there's certain thing, like point where, like even after like discussing it or like seeing pop up a few times, it's like you have like that like moment, you think, pandemic being one, I guess. And then thing is, I think in that period, like with a lot of people, like you had that moment, like it might come a bit later on, like on that, within that like period of like February to early March, where you kind of like notice when like things going to be a bit different from year on. Like, like personally myself, I'd like you kept on waking up and feel like you were in Groundhog Day and like, oh yeah, this is still reality. But I was just saying that, I guess, for yourself, because like, it's your job to focus on the news, and I suppose with like the working late nights, as you were, and as you say that sometimes you have your best ideas in late nights, and like probably for somebody like who has ADHD or neurodivergent, then that's the time where you kind of, if you're like in a just a dark room mostly by yourself, and just like probably not like facing somebody to talk to, I guess then that at like times I probably like felt like quite a lonely thing to do, and then you kind of like, and then like left a bit more with your thoughts than as would maybe like in the daytime as you'd be like a bit more separated up between like going for walks or like seeing sunlight and all that.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, having doing a late shift like that
Yeah,
has an effect on it. It has a really bad effect on anybody. Really, we're
yeah,
not really built to work like that.
yeah,
So that would and does affect anybody. I guess the ADHD element is that
yeah,
those senses are heightened.
yes,
That experience is heightened. It's a little bit like I think with when you have ADHD, and actually quite this is probably quite relevant to most neurodivergent
yeah,
conditions. Really, is that you experience things is that some things are dulled and some things are heightened, and you kind of live in those extremes, right?
yeah,
Where you're sort of like your experience of things is either a bit dulled or really intense.
yeah,
And I think that my experience of following the news and that period and like doing the overnight shift and all that sort of stuff, it was just intense. It was really intense. I was
yeah,
absorbing every single aspect of it. And I think that's probably quite relevant to ADHD as well, which brings
yeah,
us back to to Rory Smith's point about
yeah,
a lack of empathy. Actually,
yeah,
the opposite, the absolute
yeah.
opposite. Too much empathy.
Yeah, I was just saying, yeah, like that, what you said about like that, is right, with you like feeling sometimes a bit dulled and, like sometimes a bit, like ultimate, then I think that's like related to, as you say, it does relate to having neurodivergent conditions, because, like that's just like a sensory processing thing that, or very can sometimes feel hyposensitive or hypersensitive to some things, and I say that's like when those are overlapping traits of ADHD with the neurodivergent conditions.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yes, definitely. I think that's true, and I think that
Yeah,
being, again, the importance of a diagnosis is that you're able to be aware of that sort of stuff, and you can think it through, and you can catch yourself a bit. When you can feel yourself becoming overwhelmed with
yeah,
emotion, or you feel yourself being distracted at a time when actually you need to be focused,
yeah,
you can just catch yourself and
yeah,
hang on a minute, this is your ADHD's pulling down this path. Stay
yeah.
on track.
And yeah, I was just saying about that, like, and I think that was important that you caught yourself then, like, as you said, like one of the weeks just before lockdown, and like, like experiencing the like news coming up ahead of like it being turning from like, like an epidemic and then traveling all the way to Britain, the virus and that. So I guess then at least you'd be being able to see that in yourself and taking time to process your emotions to think, all right, I need to have a break now, and because I guess you were feeling quite burnout then and knowing how to take self-care.
Yeah, definitely. But I think we need to encourage that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I went on a bit of a crusade after that about, and so still am really.
Yeah,
Take a break. If you need
yeah,
to take a break, take a break. Do not be afraid to stop. Do not be afraid to down tools for a bit.
yeah,
If you're feeling burnout, if you're feeling overwhelmed, again, experiences that are heightened with neurodivergent conditions,
yeah,
stop. Be good to yourself, and also, employers as well. Let people stop. Let people have time. Let people work to their own rhythms.
yeah,
Because I very nearly crashed entirely.
yeah.
But thankfully the people that I was working for at the time were really good about it and said, yeah, go take as much time as you need to stop and regroup, and I did, and I've been pretty good ever since, really.
As you said, that is important. So is there any other things you tend to practice for self-care?
Yeah, I mean, I try to meditate which I think works.
Mhm.
I'm not 100% sure, but I do transcendental meditation, which there's been quite a bit of research into transcendental meditation and meditation generally, and ADHD.
Yeah,
And apparently, I mean, people who do transcendental meditation, and they would say this, wouldn't they? But
yeah,
apparently it really works really well, and it really helps people with ADHD.
yeah,
And I think it probably does, actually. I think there is something about settling the mind. So transcendental meditation basically is very simple, and it's,
yeah.
and I don't know if you know too much about it, but it's
Don't
kind
know
of like,
much about, yeah,
it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of like an old practice, and it's not, what I quite like about transcendental meditation is it doesn't come with any kind of like ideology. It's not really
yeah,
it's not too quirky. It's quite basic and quite simple, really. And it's you basically get given a mantra that you sort of sit for 20 minutes and repeat, and you don't have to try too hard. This is the other thing as well. Sometimes it works really
yeah,
well, sometimes it doesn't, and that's fine. You don't try too hard. And you do 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes sort of an evening. And it's basically, 40 minutes in your day to kind of settle your mind. And that will help you be calmer and more productive. And whether it's a placebo or not, I don't know. But I do find it works. And I think for somebody with a busy mind like ADHD, or again, any other kind of neurodivergence, actually, having taking that time to stop and to just clear your mind,
yeah,
and to just rest your mind,
yeah,
it can be really helpful, actually.
yeah. However, as you said, with like that, I think probably because like the repetitiveness of it, like, and what's tend to be called with stimming and like that type of behavior probably just like helps kind of like relax the soothing minds, because probably, as I said, if you're repeating like that kind of mantra, it probably like kind of like gives your brain something to do, because like you are doing that, and then like kind of like, I guess, reduces the sets out the thoughts for like at least 20 minutes, and then
Mm-hmm.
you can, I guess, feel a bit refreshed then on after that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also, there's something about the fact that you've got to sort of do it in the morning and do it in an evening. I must confess, I'm not
Yeah,
always brilliant at keeping to that schedule, but having that sort of anchor point at the beginning and the end of the day
yeah,
can be quite nice as well. And can
yeah,
quite helpful for somebody who's scatty and disorganized.
yeah,
Actually, 20 minutes in the morning I do this, 20 minutes in an evening I do that. I think it's helpful in that regard as well.
yeah.
Actually,
No, as I said, if it's important, if you found something, tried it, and then if you notice and you're like a bit anxious or a bit like stressed, then like check, even like if you don't always remember to it, but if you can remember that at that times, then that's quite important thing, and then that can help yourself then.
I also think doing stuff you enjoy for
Yeah,
self care is really important as well. I'm not a sort of a huge lover of physical exercise, really. Like, I don't really like going
yeah,
for a run. I don't like going to the gym. I've always struggled to commit to going to the gym. Always struggled to
yeah,
commit to doing that kind of stuff. But what I do is play football, right? And
yeah,
I play on a Tuesday evening. I'm really into football. I like football. I'm a football fan, and I like playing football. On a Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock, I play football, right?
yeah,
Group of friends, just five-a-side, little five-a-side game that we have. And there's something about the fact that this might be a bit obvious, but again, I think it's a heightened experience.
yeah,
There's something about the fact that I enjoy that, and that it's something
yeah,
that I'm really into, that my hyper focus kicks in. And all Tuesday, I'll be thinking about going playing football. I'll be thinking about this 7 o'clock moment where I get to go and do something that I really
yeah,
enjoy. And that can be anything. That could be anything. It could be video gaming. It
yeah,
could be cinema. It could be watching a
yeah,
film. It could be anything that brings you joy.
yeah,
Making sure that's in your day, and sort of utilizing your hyper focus to be hyper focused on that thing
yeah,
that brings you joy. And just as it happens with football, it's physical as well, so it's
yeah,
exercise, which is really good. I think that helps. Carving out moments of joy for yourself is just really, really important.
yeah. That is
Really
really
important.
important. Yeah.
Mm,
Ah,
mm.
right. Seem to talked a lot on base and everything. So, is there anything like things you want to say in addition to what you already said so far?
Lots of things,
Yeah.
lots
Okay.
of. But
Let,
well. I mean, if I was to sort of
yeah.
summarize, one of the things I'm learning a lot about ADHD still, and I'm learning a lot about the way that ADHD impacts me
Yeah.
still. I hear lots of arguments about overdiagnosis,
Yeah.
and I hear lots of arguments about people being wrongly diagnosed.
Yeah.
And I think my kind of and there's a separate conversation about medication and about medicating and about the sort of pharmaceutical industry and all that sort of stuff. I get that. I accept that.
Yeah,
I think one of the things that I would stress about a diagnosis is just how helpful a diagnosis
yeah,
is in terms of contextualizing what you're going through in your brain.
yeah,
And you cannot underestimate knowing what's happening in your brain
yeah,
and knowing why you feel a certain way, knowing why you act a certain way, putting that scaffolding that we've talked about, the sort
yeah,
of scaffolding around your brain that can help you through some of those things, whether it's being super organized or it's
yeah.
just giving yourself a break every now and again or whatever it may be.
As
I think sorry.
as you were saying after that, it kind of relates to the point you were saying about early on, with your grandfather then noticing some traits, because then at the minute, if you get another person in the family that gets diagnosed, then I think like what's common now is that, people can be able to look at like a family member who shows traits of like ADHD and then get a diagnosis of that because we're relating the traits and symptoms to themselves as, it's genetic condition. As I said, it's a point where people are starting to learn a bit more about themselves and become more self-aware. And I think we're talking about a lot more.
100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's brilliant. And I think, I as I've got into my adulthood, as I've got into adulthood, and because I've been given the opportunity to kind of craft the career that I've crafted,
yeah,
I am no longer defined by the limitations of ADHD. I'm
yeah,
defined by the opportunities that ADHD offers me, right? The creative
yeah,
doors that it opens, the natural and wonderful curiosity that ADHD allows me to have, and the way in which I see the world through the prism of having ADHD. And that sort of feeds me with that impatience to explore stuff and
yeah,
an unquenching thirst for knowledge and quantities that have driven a personal and professional success in me. And I think that when I hear those arguments about overdiagnosis, I'm plagued by the idea that there are people or people who talk about overdiagnosis or misunderstanding what the condition entails, like poor Rory Smith did. no,
yeah,
no disrespect to Rory Smith. I feel like I've given him a hard time here unnecessarily. Or those people who sort of doubt that they exist, that the condition exists at
yeah,
all. I'm haunted by the fact that there are going to be people out there who are going to spend their whole lives believing that they are not capable, or 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 suffering at the hands of a simple misunderstanding that condemns them to a life of being defined by their shortcomings rather than the unique things that make them
yeah,
successful. I exist because of ADHD. I'm able to do what I do. We are here together, you and I, talking,
yeah,
here because of ADHD. And I was given an opportunity to see my brain for what it is and to
yeah,
make my brain work for me. It changed my prospects. It changed my life. It offered me the chance to not only survive, but to thrive, right?
yeah.
And like I say, I'm haunted by the fact that there are people out there who will spend their lifetimes not able to do
Yeah,
that.
as you're saying with that, I guess you were like fortunate that you could get an early diagnosis, and then as you're saying about people getting diagnoses right now, and where you're passionate against the idea of it being like seen as overdiagnosis, then is because, as you say, like people and like yourself, like only be having a chance to know now because like as you're saying years ago, that decade, even decades a few ago, that not many people saw many different traits as they understand these days, especially, like a lot of women as well with ADHD, then their
Mm.
traits might have been a bit more invisible then.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and I've seen that in the schools that I visit
yeah,
that girls in particular having a struggle, us struggling to pinpoint what ADHD in girls is a big problem that I think we're starting to overcome actually.
yeah,
But no, I'm incredibly proud of having ADHD, and I'm incredibly proud that I was given the chance to utilize it to understand my brain and to make my brain work for me, and I think that's something we can't shout about enough.
yeah. Excellent. That's amazing. Is there anything else you want to include in the, say,
I think that's it. I think we've covered a lot of
Yeah.
ground there, haven't we? I've really
Uh,
enjoyed that. Thank
yeah.
you for talking about it, for doing what the work that you do. You're
Yeah.
brilliant.
All right. Thank you very much. And when, like, one more question, I tend to ask this to the guests, is what would make, like, the world or, like, anywhere within your life better for people who are neurodivergent? Is there any one thing that you could think of?
Bloody hell, that's a really big question.
Yeah. Oh,
There's lots, isn't there?
yeah.
Okay, let me think about that just for a moment, because that's
Yeah.
quite an important question, isn't it? So, what would make what thing would make life easier, or
Yeah.
makes life easier?
Yeah. One thing like that. Yeah.
Okay. Um. All right. Yeah. Um. Give yourself a break.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean literally a break, go on holiday, or stop doing work or whatever.
Yeah.
Go easy on yourself. There's a tendency when you have a neurodivergent condition to to sort of be defined by the struggle of it, right, rather than the opportunities, right? So that's
Yeah.
one element of that, but also to feel bad about the fact that you can't do things. I sometimes I do sometimes get worked up about the fact that I've forgotten to put the dishwasher on, or I haven't texted that person back in ages,
Yeah.
or there's this thing that it's, or I've missed that meeting, or I've not put that in the diary, or whatever it may be. These, when those shortcomings of ADHD do present themselves, combining
Yeah.
the shortcomings of ADHD presenting themselves with being hypersensitive, you can beat yourself up and you can give yourself a really hard time. Give yourself a break.
Yeah.
We're all navigating life in our own way. We're all figuring it out one day at a time. Nobody really knows what they're doing here.
Yeah.
Nobody really has all of the answers. Go easy on yourself. Don't be bogged down by the anxiety of it. You're doing absolutely fine. Give yourself a break.
Excellent point to make. And do you want to just promote anything, or like just tell people where you can follow you on social media, anything like that?
Yes, fine. Come on. Yes, I'd love a chat about ADHD, and I love a chat about neurodivergency in general. So yes, at Darryl Morris. I'm just Darryl Morris, I think, on most of the social places. So Instagram is Darryl Morris.
Yeah.
I'm a bit bigger on Twitter. I do a bit more on Twitter. So, but then Elon Musk has destroyed that, hasn't he? So I'm being on there a bit less. But at Darryl Morris is where you can find me. Yeah, come say hi.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. This has been a lovely chat. Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks.